Hey, Dan Beagleman here. In this video, I'll teach you how to play Breezin by George Benson. I'll show you all the principal guitar parts, the chord structure that the song is built on, and scales for soloing on this tune. There'll also be a performance video that I did with a rhythm track later in the video. In the description, there are chapters with time codes, so you can skip ahead to any chapter that you might want to see, or just watch the whole video as it lays out. Okay, on to how to play Breezin by George Benson. Breezin is built on a 4-chord cycle, 1, 6, 2, 5 in the key of D. What does that mean? D would be 1, B would be 6, E would be 2, and A would be 5. So if you hear, well, that's basically what the song is built on. Now the chords would be in the key of D. If I'm playing the 1 chord, if I'm playing it would be a major chord. The 6th chord is always minor. The 2 chord is minor, and the 5 chord is major or dominant, like a 7th chord or a 9th chord or something like that. So again, 1, 6, 2, 5 in the key of D would be D major, B minor, E minor, A. Now if I play these chords, sounds kind of like the tune, you know, it'll follow the structure, but it's not going to sound as hip in a way. And the chords that will work better and sound closer to the recording, actually, will be a little bit more advanced chords. So instead of playing D major, I'm going to play D major 7. For the B minor, I'm going to play B minor 7. For the E minor, I'm going to play an E minor 9. And for the A chord, or the A7, I'm going to play an A13. So these 4 chords, D major 7, B minor 7, E minor 9th, A13. And the nice thing about these voicings, if you notice on the top of each chord, getting the note string 2 fret 7, which is F sharp, which is the 3rd note in the key of D. It's a 3rd of D, and it gives this almost like a pedal tone throughout each of the 4 chords. And on the dominant, the A7th chord, if you roll your first finger across, on the A7th chord, if you do like a partial bar, you can get that A root note, you know, for the A13th chord. But these chords really sound very nice together, you know. Again, here's the standard chords, if you will, for 1, 6, 2, 5. Right? As opposed to, right? So that's what you want to play for this tune, and the rhythm is basically just that's pretty much the whole tune. There's one section in the tune later on in, during his guitar solo, I think when he substitutes the first 2 chords from like an F sharp minor to an E minor, possibly something like that. But other than that, it's, like I said, it's just that 1, 6, 2, 5 cycle. Okay, now that I showed you the chords that the song is built on, that 1, 6, 2, 5 cycle, there are 3 principal guitar parts that you need to learn to play all the parts on the recording. It starts off with a line that the guitar is doubled with the bass. And that pretty much runs through a lot of the tune. It goes away during the solos, I believe, but under the guitar head, that continues. And the bass continues playing that, although when the solo started, kind of just meanders between, like, you know, 1 and 5, D and A. Anyway, here's that line slowly. And there's your beat 1 to start the next cycle. The next part of the tune is one of the signature head melodies, which is sometimes referred to as a double stop, because it's 2 notes played on the first 2 strings, the E and the B string. You might recognize this as soon as you hear it. Right? I'm sure it's recognizable if you know the tune. And to see where this came from, it's based on, again, the whole song is built on D major, so it's interesting to see how these things kind of come together. Here's a little D chord in the open position, right? If I play the notes just on the first two strings, I have a D and an F sharp, right? Now, in the key of D, I have two sharps, F and C. There's a D major scale. So if you take this little dyad here, this little, double stop, and if I move this up on the guitar neck as if I was playing a D major scale on each string. In other words, on string 2 I have a D note, right? So if I just, follow up a D scale on string 2, remember I have F sharp and C sharp, so I have, right? And on string 1 I have an F sharp note, and if I move that up, like in a D scale, keep going, and now if I put these together, if I kept going, right? So in a sense, what I'm doing is I'm just taking these two notes, and on each of these strings I'm following up, playing a D major scale on string 2, starting on the D note, and then starting on string 1 I'm having F sharp, and I'm just following up a D major scale starting on F sharp. And the reason I'm pointing this out, so you can see where this came from, this. Right, that came from this. Right, so it's just that piece of the D major scale on the two strings, and that's where that came from. And now here's the main head melody of the song. As I said, the whole song is built on D major, so that melody comes out of a D major scale. Here's a D major scale in position 7. I'll start on the D root note. I'll go as high as the scale will let me go, without shifting left and right, which is also a D octave. The lowest note in this scale will be B, or the 6th, on the string 6. So I'm going to start on the D note, go to the high D note, return and get that lowest note there, come back as low as I can, and then return back to my root note to complete it. So here's a D major scale in position 7. All the notes are in position 7, covering frets 7 to 10, except on string 3 I have to shift back 1 fret to fret 6 to get that C sharp. I could also get that if I stretch my pinky on string 4 out to fret 11, but this is probably an easy way to play it. So again, D major scale, position 7. Right? So that head riff is starting on the 5th of D, which is A. It's the 5th tone in the scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? The 5th of D is A, and going up to the octave. So it's just playing a D major scale, starting on the 5th and going up to the 5th, an octave higher. And then, right, you just adds that little thing on there. But that, the critical part is to see, the essential thing to see is that it's just a D major scale starting and ending on the 5th. Right, but what he does to color it up a little bit, he does a little bit of a, like a little hammer-on pull-off there. Instead of hitting the note with his pinky, jumps up to his first finger and just plays that little hammer-on pull-off. Just to add a little color to it. So very, very simple to play. You could leave off that little, hammer-on pull-off and just play the A note. You could just go. And it'll work for you just as well. So again, the 3 signature guitar parts are the guitar that doubles with the bass. Okay, then you have this little 2-note riff, this little double stop. And then you have the guitar head. the three principal parts to Breezin, and as I mentioned, all built on this 1-6-2-5 chord cycle. Now, let's move on to soloing over Breezin. I'm going to break this into two chapters. In this chapter, I'll show you 6 scale patterns that you can use for soloing on Breezin. And then in the next chapter, I'm going to show you 4 patterns that you can use for soloing using octaves. And it's a bit of a different, technique. So that's why I wanted to break it into 2 chapters. Okay, so let's start with soloing on Breezin, and we'll start with the major scale. That scale pattern that I showed you previously, where the head, of the tune is, built on that D major scale in position 7. Okay, now here's a D major scale in position 9. It's a different fingering pattern, and it will give you a bit of a different range. In this case, this will take me up to an E, where here the first scale that I just showed you, the highest note is D. Here, the highest note will be E, so it'll extend the range of the scale a little bit, and the fingering pattern is a little bit different. So also, like I did with that scale I just showed you, here's a D major scale in position 9, and this will cover frets 9 through 12. And the reason why you want to have 2 scales was, obviously there's a lot of other ways to play major scales, but at least having these 2, because this way you can kind of, meander around between these 2 scales, right? So I'm just kind of freelancing, playing notes between these 2 scale patterns, and by having the 2 patterns, I can do some glissandos, which are kind of nice. Glissando meaning sliding, from one note to another. In other words, if I'm in position 7 with this major scale, I have fingers 1, 2, and 4. If I go up to position 9 on that scale on string 2, I have my pinky at the 12th fret, so I can go, and by sliding up, or you get some nice little phrases, right? Colorful things that you can play, and like I said, glissandos, really, really pretty sounding, right? So I'm just, like I said, just kind of meandering, dancing around between notes in those 2 scales. So again, starting with the D major scale in those 2 positions, and of course, if you know other positions for a D major scale, have at it, But those 2 will serve you well. Okay, you can also play pentatonic scales. A pentatonic scale is a 5-tone scale, where the major scales I just showed you are 7-tone scales. So here's a D major pentatonic scale. You probably know these patterns, right? It uses 5 of the 7 tones from the D major scale. All of those notes are in the major scale. So you might wonder and say, well, if they're all in there, what's the difference? Why do I need to know that scale? Because the thing is, if you're playing the pentatonic scale, by leaving out those 2 notes that the pentatonic scale doesn't have, gives you a different color than if you add those 2 notes. Right? Sounds different. By leaving out or playing those 2 notes, in other words, if you play the pentatonic scale, you're leaving out the 4th and the 7th tone of the major scale. By not playing them, you get a different type of sound than if you do play them. That's a pentatonic scale. Major scale, right? Sounds a little bit different because you have that 4th, the 7th, right? So again, the pentatonic scale will give you a different sound because you're leaving out those 2 notes that the major scale has, the 4th and the 7th. Now, the pentatonic scale, you can also add a passing tone between the 2nd and 3rd degree of that scale, and get a D major blues scale, which is now a 6-tone scale. And here's that slowly. There's your D major blues scale. So it has a, that little bluesier tone, if you want to call it that. That's why it's called the blues scale. And it connects the second and the third degree of the pentatonic scale. Okay, so you have D major scale in 2 positions, D major pentatonic, D major blues. And now I'm going to show you D minor pentatonic. Again, you probably know this scale. It's the same fingering pattern as the major pentatonic, except in the major pentatonic, my pinky is on the root note D. Here I'm going to put my first finger on the root note D, and I have. And you can also, if you notice, if I put my pinky and use that as the root note by putting my pinky on string 6, it's an F major pentatonic. So every pentatonic scale is really 2 in 1. It could be a minor pentatonic or major pentatonic depending on which note you use as your key center. I have some videos on pentatonic and blues scales you might want to check out, and I have a video called pentatonic scales, which one should I use? In other words, depending on the type of music that you're playing or the song you're playing over, should you be using a minor pentatonic or a major pentatonic, or a minor blues or major blues, and sometimes you can use both. And in this song, here's an example where you can actually use both. Okay, now the song again being sort of a very, like a pretty sounding song, the major scales, the major pentatonic, the major blues are going to sound good, but you can also throw in, which George Benson does, some minor pentatonic. As soon as you hear that, right, it changes the whole characteristic sound. So George Benson throws in a couple of riffs at times with the D minor pentatonic scale. Right, and you could hear right away it brings it into a different place, sonically. But the majority is the major pentatonic sound. So again, as a comparison, here's a D major pentatonic, kind of happy sounding, and D minor pentatonic. Right? So they both work, but the majority of the tune, because like I said, it's kind of a happy sounding tune, you can stay more with the major sounding stuff. And also now here's the D minor blues scale, like when I added that extra note and turned the major pentatonic scale into a major blues scale. I'll do the same thing. I'll turn the minor pentatonic into a minor blues scale, and this time I'm going to add a passing tone between the 3rd and the 4th degree. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to add that A flat in there. Okay, D minor pentatonic. D minor blues with that additional passing tone. Okay, so 6 scales that you can use. 2 major scale patterns, major pentatonic, major blues, minor pentatonic, minor blues. They'll all work, and again, as I said, stick with more the major sounding scales, the major scales and the major pentatonic, major blues for the majority of your soloing, but you can also, as I said, throw in some licks from the minor pentatonic and or the minor blues to, change the character up a little bit, kind of roughs it up a little bit, but will work. But as I said, if you stayed with the minor pentatonic and the minor blues, like from the majority of the soloing, it's going to kind of take it in a different direction, not as close to the record sounding, because again, the prettiness, if you will, of these chords. As I said in the previous chapter, I was going to break up the scales for soloing into 2 chapters. In the previous chapter, I showed you 2 major scale patterns, 2 pentatonic scales, and 2 blues scales, both major and minor. Okay. In this chapter, I'm going to show you the pentatonic scales, major, minor, and the blues scales, major, minor, but played in octaves. And the reason that I broke up the patterns for soloing into 2 chapters is because there's a different technique that if you're not aware of for playing octaves, and that's why I wanted to have a separate chapter for that. Right? So when you're playing octaves, there's a technique involved. Let's say I'll start with an A note on string 6, okay, at fret 5. If I hit the note on string 4 at fret 7, there's my octave. You can hear that, both A notes. So I got string 6 and string 4, and with my pick I'm going to strike 3 strings, 6, 5, and 4. But string 5, that middle string, I'm going to mute it out by just having the flesh of my first finger just kind of roll down a little bit, just enough to kill it. Right, so I'm killing string 5, I'm dampening it with my finger, but I also then need to hear string 4. So again, hit 3 strings but only hearing 2. That's how you get an octave on strings 6 and 4, and there are 4 sets of these. There are 4 sets of strings that you can get these octaves on. String 6 and 4. Then if I just go down to string 5 and 3, same idea. Okay. So I'm hitting strings 5, 4, and 3, but muting out string 4. When I get to string 4 and string 2 as my octave set, instead of fingers 1 and 3, I'm going to use fingers 1 and 4. Right? And muting out string 3. And then also when I get to string 3 and 1 as my octave set, I'm going to mute out string 2. But I'm using fingers 1 and 4 again. Because if I use fingers 1 and 3, I wouldn't have an octave, I'd have a major 7th. Okay? So the 4 sets of octaves, string 6 and 4, 5 and 3, 4 and 2, 3 and 1. And for the fingering patterns, it's fingers 1 and 3, 1 and 3, then 1 and 4, and 1 and 4. And with that, you have, and you can just, go around all over the fingerboard. And the cool thing about playing with octaves is right away, you sound like a jazz guitar player, even if you're not. So there's a quick little trick. How do you sound like a jazz player when you're not? Play octaves. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a D major pentatonic scale played in octaves. I'm going to start on the 5th of the scale, which is A, which is the 5th of D, as like a little lead-in. I'll go as high as up to F sharp, which is the 3rd, come back to the lowest note, and then return to my octave to complete. This is what it's going to sound like. And these are the notes in the D major pentatonic scale, and I, again, as I said, played horizontally. Okay, and again, as I said, it sounds a lot jazzier, than playing single notes. And now here's a D major blues scale played in octaves. I'm going to use the same pattern that I just showed you for the major pentatonic, but I'm going to add that extra note, like in the pentatonic scale. Again, here's D major pentatonic and D major blues, with that passing tone. And I'll do the same idea now with the D major pentatonic scale in octaves. Here's a D major blues scale played in octaves. Okay, D major blues scale in octaves. Here's D minor pentatonic scale played in octaves. And now if I add that extra note to make it a blues scale, like here's your D minor pentatonic scale in position 10. If I add that extra passing tone, and the same idea now if I apply it to the D minor blues scale in octaves. Right? So those 4 scales, like you saw in the previous chapter, major pentatonic, major blues, minor pentatonic, minor blues, and obviously playing with the octaves, you get a sound that's a lot more like sound like a jazz guitar player. As I said, even if you're not a jazz guitar player, just do that and you'll amaze your friends and go, wow, man, you sound like Joe Pass or something like that. Okay, so there's your little trick to sound like a jazz player when you're not. Here's my performance of Breezin by George Benson. And now just to summarize a couple of the key points about Breezin. 1, the song is built on the 1625 platform. The song is in the key of D. So 1625, the root notes would be D, B, E, A. 1625 in the key of D. And by playing these chords that I showed you, the D major 7, B minor 7, E minor 9, and A 13. You have that F sharp on string 2, kind of acting as a pedal tone riding through all of the 4 chords, and gives you a nice, really nice chord connections. The 3 key guitar parts is the guitar bass double. Okay, then you have the 2-note double stop riff. And they have the guitar head, which actually comes in with a pickup. It's the 2nd 16th note of beat 3, like 1, 2, 3. Right? And now for soloing, as I showed you, you have major scales, major pentatonic, major blues, minor pentatonic, minor blues. But as I said, you want to stick more with the major scales and the major pentatonic, major blues scales. Use the minor blues scales. Occasionally you could throw them in to, like, give you a bit of a different edge to it, but being that the song is kind of like a very pretty song, you want to stay more in the major category than the minor category. So when you're playing octaves, you have 4 sets of strings that you can use octaves with: 6/4, 5/3, 4/2, 3/1. When you're doing octaves with the 6th and 4th string, it's your first finger on string 6, your third finger 2 frets higher on string 4, and muting out the middle string, string 5, with your first finger. Okay, so you have, when it comes to strings 5 and 3, same idea, first and third finger. When you're playing 4 and 2, you can use your first finger and your pinky for the octave, and muting out the middle string. And then for strings 3 and 1, also first and third finger. So you have, right? And also when you're playing the octaves, using glissandos, when you're sliding, from a note, you're hitting a note, going up or down, will give you a cool, jazzier type of sound again. So keep that in mind. Playing octaves and using glissandos to just slide, whether you're going up or down, either ascending or descending to a different note in the scale. There you have the elements you need to play the tune, the signature guitar parts, and lots of ideas for soloing, and as I said, sounding almost like a jazz guitar player, even if you're not. So amaze your friends, and they go, "Wow, man, you sound like a jazz guitar player. How'd that happen?" And you tell them, "Well, I watched this video, and now I'm a jazz player." If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and hit the thumbs up button, as it helps this channel to grow. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments section below. I'd be happy to respond to any and all questions and comments. Thanks for watching. I'm Dan Beagleman, and that's How to Play Breezin by George Benson. Have a nice day.